Hello everybody and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. This is a major week for crypto and the price action that we're seeing. We're nearing closer and closer towards the very ending of Q4, which historically speaking has produced our biggest rallies in all of our crypto bull markets. On top of that, we're only 2 days away from our next Fed meeting where they're going to determine whether or not they're going to cut interest rates for a second consecutive month. This is a very powerful week that I expect to have a lot of upside potential as well as a lot of volatility. So today I wanted to break down the charts, make sure that you guys know exactly what is taking place in our markets so that we can look to target the ending of this year for when we're going to be looking to take some profit. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you found any value in this video, please do me a favor, hit that like, comment, and subscribe button. Without further ado, let's jump right into this amazing video today. So right off the bat, let's start off by taking a look at Poly Market. Let's talk a little bit about what is going to be happening over the next couple days when we actually have another Fed meeting. These are really the drivers of our crypto market because we've been in this quantitative tightening period ever since the last cycle, where they've basically been extracting liquidity out of the markets. And this was all to stop the rising inflation, all the high interest rates and things like this. This is kind of a way to taper off from that. Last month, we finally had our very first rate cut. What we saw after was the market bounced. We ended up seeing some more choppy price action. It didn't really give us any sort of confirmation one way or another. But now the market is once again pricing in a 98% chance at our second rate cut. And it's looking like it's going to be about 25 basis points. Inflation, yesterday the numbers came out that inflation is actually down, lower than expectations. So that's always a really good sign that the Fed can also continue to lower the interest rates. As long as the inflation isn't taking off, then the Fed's going to most likely continue to keep lowering these interest rates. Now, with the idea that we're going to see another 25 basis point cut, and it's pricing it at a 98% chance, it's very likely that this is going to go through and actually stimulate the markets. And I do believe that the stock market is pricing in this as it stands right now. The stock market being the S&P 500, it already made this new all-time high, and it kind of been following along, or Bitcoin had been following along with it, where they kind of made new all-time highs at the same time. And you know, the stock market has been chopping, making higher highs and higher lows, and Bitcoin throughout this time has really just been kind of going sideways. Hasn't really done anything, but now if you guys are noticing, we actually saw a gap up 3 days in a row. This is on the daily time frame. We saw a gap right here. We saw a gap right here, and now we're actually gapping up for the third day in a row. In my opinion, this is telling us that the market's starting to get extended. I think that with the coming announcement that they're going to be cutting rates again, most people are speculating they're starting to dive into these risk-on investments like the S&P 500. You always see this thing benefit the most when we ended up cutting rates and we're living inside of that low-interest environment. And if you guys notice down in here, we've seen this big breakout and the market's starting to get kind of parabolic in here. In my opinion, as long as the stock market's going to continue to push up into new all-time highs, especially at this quick end of a pace, this is where we're going to start seeing all that money flocking outside of the safe havens and moving into more of the risk-on type of plays. We already saw gold take off. Gold is having its sell-off. We can come over here and look at gold, and we can see that gold's finally topping out. And in my opinion, we're going to see a decent pullback inside of gold before this is ready to start bouncing again. And if we zoom out, we notice that gold's been on this massive run. And throughout this entire time, Bitcoin's really been lagging and underperforming it. We have days where Bitcoin goes down and we're seeing gold actually performing really, really well. So I don't find it coincidental that at the time where gold finally starts to top up here, we start getting this pullback. We're starting to see the other markets breaking out and making pretty big moves because so far we're down about 10%. We come over here and we take a look at the S&P 500. That's right at the moment where this thing really started to break out. So in my opinion, we're seeing a rotation out of the safe haven assets, moving into more of the risky type of plays. And all of that is really revolving around this rate cut. The more that they're going to cut rates, the more that money is going to flock into these more risky type of plays. And as long as that's happening, we're going to see crypto pump as well. Coming over here and taking a look at Bitcoin, let's jump into the shorter time frames of the 4 hour, and let's take a peek at what is actually taking place. Now, as you guys know, we've been chopping and fighting around this low for a long time. We've actually retested the low of that wick, had a false breakdown right here, and we've had a couple different fake outs right around this support level being around 107,000. If you guys notice, this also takes us back to our base support. We've had a couple peaks below, false attempts at breakdowns, but so far we've held the level, and that's been the main thing I've been talking about. On the weekly time frames, we're still holding the same major level that we needed to, even dating all the way back to this prior consolidation at about 107K. We've been just really riding and bouncing along this same range, and we ended up starting to see a little bit of a rise in Bitcoin. Over the weekend, we started to rise. I was a little skeptical, wondering about Monday today, how the market was going to react, because generally when Bitcoin rallies over the weekend, it's just because of the fact the other market is closed. So, generally we're going to see Bitcoin kind of pick up after it had these big sell-offs. We just went through a big correction over in here. So throughout this week, I was wondering, how was Monday going to open, and was it going to be bullish? And as of right now, we're still technically holding that support. We're still above resistance levels. We've still maintained higher highs and higher lows. So even if we came back down and fully cemented ourselves off this level, I still anticipate that we're going to continue to creep on higher. And realistically, guys, we should be targeting the range high of this move. We already hit the range low down in here. In my opinion, we're going to make another run back up to these range highs. We're probably just going to keep chopping around here. Wouldn't be surprised if after we hit this resistance, we come back down once more. And then from there, maybe we'll be able to get a breakout. But we're going to have to watch and see. The big picture in the shorter time frames for Bitcoin, really everything is still just chopping around. But when I zoom out and look at Bitcoin, we've been chopping and we've been just kind of maintaining these higher highs, but we haven't managed to see a breakdown of the trend. So far, everything's holding. The range highs are holding as support, even though we got this choppy price action. When we're looking over here and seeing the S&P 500 gapping up 3 days in a row and seeing such a big rise, and we're also coming over here and actually taking a look at the gold chart and seeing this pullback, I do think that this is the early signal that money is starting to circulate back into the crypto market, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all of those other ones. And so if we're going to continue to see gold pulling back in here, which I do think is likely, we just had this massive move off of the lows. I wouldn't be surprised to see a short-term correction down in here. Maybe we come back down to this 236 to 382. I'm not really anticipating much more than that, but I do think that's very likely. Having this massive move inside of gold, all of that was really around the inflation. Everybody was freaking out about the debt, and so we started to see China buying up as much gold as they possibly could, and throughout that entire time, gold was just ripping. Now that we're seeing a little bit of a pullback, I think that now the momentum is going to trickle back down into the crypto markets, and if we're going to see this thing pull back down to, let's say, like the 236, you're pretty much looking at about a 15% move. If we come to the 382, you'd be looking at like a 24% move. Any move inside of that range, I think, is going to give a lot of upside potential for the stock market, being the S&P 500, as well as Bitcoin. And having Bitcoin just kind of maintaining the same support level, not really changing, I think that we can finally start to break out of this and take us into that final blow-off top that we've been watching for. Because really, I think that that's the final thing to happen this cycle. I don't know exactly where this cycle is going to top at, whether it's the end of this year, whether it's a little bit into 2026, Q1 of 2026. I don't think that really matters that much. Obviously, we're still following the 4-year cycles, but where the cycle tops is the one variable that can change. We're looking at 4-year cycles from peak low to peak low, right? So you're always analyzing the bear markets, not the tops. So in this cycle, we could see a little bit of a variance. I wouldn't be surprised if this market ran up here. We kind of got this final blow off top, and we ended up peaking a couple months into 2026 before that next bear market starts. I'm not going to be surprised to see something like that, because when I zoom out and look at the price action, I still look at Bitcoin and I still see this needing one more final blow off top. I'm going to maintain that belief. I still think that this is going to have one more final move. How high that move goes, I really don't know, and I'm not trying to predict the price. I'm just saying that when I zoom out and look at this chart, I think that this is a consistent uptrend that's just lacking the final blow off top. And I think that all of everything that we need to see is pretty much playing out to give us that blow off top. The stock market's now making new all-time highs, where they're pricing in another rate cut, and it's looking like we're going to see another rate cut for 3 months in a row. So not only this month of October, but following up into November, it's looking like we're going to see another rate cut. So if we have 3 months planned of consecutive rate cuts, the gold market's finally topping, giving a little bit of price action, giving a little bit of boost into some of these more risk-on plays. I think it's likely that we have kind of the perfect storm playing out here, where all of the shifting pieces are kind of coming in together to give that final blow-off top for crypto. Gold's topping, stock market's in new all-time highs. We're ending up seeing the rate cuts happening for 3 months consecutive in a row. All of this stuff is very bullish for Bitcoin and crypto as a whole. Now, the final chart I wanted to cover really is the altcoins, which is going to be centered around Ethereum. Coming over here and taking a look at Ethereum, Ethereum is still holding that breakout. I've continued to maintain the belief that this is a breakout that will hold in the same ways that we did in the last cycle. Now, the price action between ETH this cycle and the last cycle is a little bit different, but ETH looks like Bitcoin's last cycle with the COVID capitulation and all of that. But even in the Ethereum's last cycle, this double bottom formation that we saw back down in here, it's kind of similar to what we're seeing today, where you had this sort of resistance level, and once that resistance level was broken and we retest that as new support, that's what gave us that liftoff into new all-time highs. Now, obviously, the price action's different. This is a much bigger type of consolidation, but it's all relatively the same. You still have somewhat of a triangle formation. Once price breaks out of the downtrending resistance and retests it, that's really where that new all-time high starts. So when I look at ETH, I still am confident that we can continue to hold throughout the rest of this cycle. Like I stated, guys, it's not only when I'm looking at Ethereum, but it's also when I'm looking at Bitcoin as well. I look at all of these as needing one final peak in their cycles, one final blow off top. Where that blow off top peaks at, I don't know. Like I said, it could be the end of this year. It could be the beginning of the following year in 2026. It doesn't really change anything for me. When I look at this chart, I'm willing to hold and I'm willing to continue to kind of stick to my positions, even though we are so late at the 4-year trend, because I still think that this is just lacking one more final move. Now, I said that in the last cycle, and I was really regretful of that decision of staying so heavily invested. But when I'm looking at this cycle, and because I got caught off guard in the last cycle, I'm still leaning towards the belief that this is a reversal point, a big breakout and retest, and we're just lacking that final move. And, I understand being so close to the 4-year cycle trend that, I said the same thing in the last cycle. I said, oh, we're just missing that final blow off top. Bitcoin's going to run to 100K. And then 69,500 ended up being the top, and I got caught off guard from that. I wasn't able to sell nearly the amount as I should have, but, that's just the way that the cycles work. Going into this cycle, I was really weary about that. I said, we get to the end of the 4-year cycle, and it's going to be tricky to hold past that same threshold, considering how I got caught off guard in the last cycle from the same thing. But when I'm looking at this cycle today, I don't really think I have a lot to lose necessarily, because so many of these altcoins are still basically at their rock bottom prices. They're still at their bear market lows, haven't really changed for the last 2 or 3 years. And when I'm looking at all of the high caps making these big breakouts, and specifically with ETH retesting this breakout level, I still think that we're going to have another big push that's going to really bring a lot of new liquidity into these altcoins, into Bitcoin, and all of the above. Because keep in mind, guys, ETH doesn't move unless Bitcoin rallies. And when I look at Bitcoin, I still think it needs one more final move. And, when I look at ETH, I think it's even more apparent that this thing needs one more final move. And this one's definitely not going to get a final move unless Bitcoin leads the way for it. So I'm kind of leaning towards that belief. We've got one more big push here. And tomorrow, or what I should say in 2 days, we're going to really see how this is going to impact the market. I wouldn't be surprised if this next rate cut ends up being a pretty bullish sentiment, where almost instantaneously, once it happens, we start to see the market pick up. And like I stated, I think a lot of that has to do with gold finally getting a pullback. No more people are going to be continuing to flock into gold. We kind of saw a little bit of a blow off top happen in the short term. I think that this one's going to take a couple months to really start to correct back down before we get that next push higher. And as gold starts to chill out, that's where we're going to really start to see the S&P 500 fly. We're going to see Bitcoin start to fly. And, Ethereum is ultimately tied to all of that. So, guys, this is my belief, what's going to happen in the crypto markets. If you did find any value in this video, please do me a favor. Hit the like, comment, and subscribe button. Make sure you don't miss out on any of these videos like the one provided for you here. If you guys want to see anything that I'm going to be buying, selling, trading over the rest of the cycle, and most importantly, when we take profits on our long-term portfolios, links are in the description. Go ahead and sign up on my website. Lifetime access. Once you're in, you're always going to be in, even when I move outside of crypto and invest in other markets. So if you guys want to be able to see anything like that, links are in the description. With that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. As always, peace out.